New Zealand's rivers and lakes are central to its proud global image as a land with breathtaking scenery and a pristine environment. But can that reputation really be justified? In a special two-part investigation, we've been to examine disturbing claims that the country's waterways are among the most contaminated in the developed world.
Let us take you. Let us show you around.
This is New Zealand as the world knows it. A small, picturesque Pacific country with pristine natural beauty.
Let shores of gold greet you.
So pristine that it's marketed as a premier international tourism destination under the banner 100% pure. In no small part because of its breathtaking lakes and rivers.
We're spirits of the land.
But in reality, the purity of New Zealand's fresh water is far from 100%. Its quality has been in decline for decades. And the main reason, say experts, is obvious to see.
This is a problem that can be mapped to the last 15 years and the intensive and extensive expansion of the dairy industry. These four-legged things that are black and white and go moo and have the pollution footprint of 14 people. So if you look at New Zealand's population in cow terms, we're basically turned into Japan. That's the problem.
Over the last 20 years, that industry has grown so rapidly that New Zealand is now the world's largest dairy exporter. But the white gold rush has its dark side. With a cow population equivalent to 90 million humans, the effluent has to go somewhere, and that somewhere is into New Zealand's rivers and lakes. Gigantic volume of cow urine they produce, laced with excess nitrates from the fertilizer in the grass they feed on, passes through the soil and into the water table, asphyxiating waterways. The situation is so bad that 2/3 of the country's rivers are too polluted to swim in, and nearly half its lakes are irreversibly damaged. Water quality is now New Zealand's top environmental issue. Yet there are few signs that the country is adequately dealing with the problem. In fact, there are plans to expand the dairy industry, dramatically increasing cow numbers. Critics believe this will only exacerbate New Zealand's already dire water pollution problems. This planned expansion needs water, masses of it. Producing a single litre of milk takes 1,000 litres of water. With this in mind, the government, armed with the $480 million New Zealand dollar irrigation fund, is facilitating at least 10 new water storage schemes around the country. The most ambitious of these projects is planned for Hawke's Bay, a rural and relatively poor agricultural region. If built, the Ruataniwha water storage scheme would be New Zealand's largest ever irrigation dam, with the price tag approaching $1 billion New Zealand dollars. But critics worry the dam will be an economic white elephant, and they warn that more irrigation will facilitate more intensive agriculture, creating more of the water pollution problems that have beset other irrigated parts of New Zealand. Over the past year, we've been following the increasingly divisive debate over the Ruataniwha Dam. Not only would it be the largest project of its kind in New Zealand's history, it's also a test case for other planned irrigation schemes around the country. Whether it gets built or not could have far-reaching ramifications for the future of New Zealand's fresh water. In August 2016, the country was shocked by news that the people of Havelock North, a small Hawke's Bay town, had been poisoned by their own drinking water. It was one of the largest waterborne contamination events in the developed world, and it made international news.
Trying to keep their community well, volunteers out on the street of Havelock North offering free bottled water and support. More than 3,000 residents have been struck down with Campylobacter, a violent gastrobug that's left dozens in hospital, some in intensive care.
By the time the outbreak was over, a third of the town's 15,000 inhabitants had been made ill by the bug, and 3 deaths were linked to it. By mid-September last year, with the contamination event still fresh in the public's mind, a low-key regional election was gearing up to become a referendum on the controversial dam project. Pro- and anti-dam councillors began squaring off against each other. Alan Dick is a veteran local politician and one of the originators of the project. He's long believed the dam is essential to revive Hawke's Bay's rural economy.
Supplementary water flows from some source are going to be required. Otherwise, our land-based industry will be devastated. And we already are a region which has relatively high unemployment, relatively low wage rates, and social indicators that are not impressive.
Paul Bailey, a former bank manager turned Green politician, was standing on a single issue, summarised by his election slogan, "Can the dam." He's convinced the scheme would be bad both for human health and the region's rivers.
How are you? Hello, my name's Paul Bailey. I'm standing for Regional Council this year. The Havelock North situation has raised awareness of how fragile our supply of fresh water is. People are really seeing a connection, or they're really making the connection between the state of the Tukitoki River, which is one of the most polluted rivers in New Zealand, and the Campylobacter outbreak in Havelock North. They're also seeing this connection that basically the Reo Dam project is going to create an even bigger problem in terms of the amount of pollutants coming down the Tukitoki River. So it's only going to make it worse. It doesn't stack up economically, it doesn't stack up environmentally, nor does it stack up socially.
As the campaign heated up, Paul Bailey was preparing for a pre-election meeting in which candidates would publicly argue their case. Although it didn't look like it, the outcome of this low-key regional election promised to have national repercussions.
What's at stake at the end of the day, in fact, is whether the dam will proceed.
If Ruataniwha goes ahead, it'll help establish a precedent that can be replicated for other planned irrigation schemes around the country. Supporters say this will further boost economic growth, but opponents believe that economic growth will be only short-term and will come at great environmental cost to New Zealand's already threatened waterways. Much would therefore hang on the outcome of the Hawke's Bay election.
If there's a shift of balance of power in the council, then there's a possibility that those opposed to it will use their numbers and stop the scheme.
There are 9 councillors on regional council that sit around the table and make the decisions. 5 of them are in favour of the dam, 4 of them are against the dam. There is only 1 seat that needs to change hands.
We hope that that will not be the case, because there will be very severe economic consequences and a lost opportunity for significant environmental gain and improvement of water quality in that river. Maintaining environmental sustainability in Hawke's Bay, firstly, it has to be founded on maintaining a healthy and prosperous economy. That's how we earn our living in the world. You cannot be green if you're in the red. We've got to do that very, very carefully so that we don't destroy our local economy and leave some prospect of a secure future for our children and our grandchildren.
The definition of stupidity is to do the same thing over and over and expect different results. If the Tukitoki is polluted in part because of over-allocation of water and intensification of agriculture, why would we be encouraging more of the same? How can an additional 6,000 hectares of dairying in the Ruataniwha be of environmental benefit? Why would we put water quality at risk of potentially polluting our water supply? A vital question which has now been asked by the citizens of Havelock North. The solution to pollution is not dilution. It is to stop the pollution in the first place. We need to can the dam. Thank you.
So how justifiable are claims that the proposed dam would actually improve the quality of the region's waterways? If built, its outflow would enter this river, the Tukitoki, which a leading environmental scientist told us is already one of New Zealand's most polluted.
Some of the tributaries feeding into the Tuki, there is a measure of the ecological health that is in the order of 30 to 40. And in my 25 years of monitoring streams and rivers all around New Zealand, I have yet to come across streams which have had such a low measure of ecosystem health.
The dam, Alan Dick insists, will be used to flush away pollution by releasing large volumes of water into the river.
More water in the river means that it is a better habitat for native life, and the flushing flows which are required in the dam consents, that's 4 releases over the dry period of a million cubic metres at a time.
But according to Professor Death, there's no scientific evidence to back this claim.
I find it ironic that many of the irrigation lobbies say that they want to set up these irrigation schemes to dam the rivers so that the river can be healthier. I'm not aware of any river in the world where you've dammed it and made it better.
And Alan argues, not only will the dam be used to flush pollution out of rivers, but strict new farming regulations will stop more pollutants being deposited into them.
That very rigid set of environmental rules will ensure that farmers will farm in an environmentally sustainable way, that the Regional Council will constantly monitor for nutrient discharge into the river. They'll be policed all right. We have a compliance team and they're out in the field every day.
We wanted to see that compliance team in action. At first we were told that wouldn't be possible for health and safety reasons. But eventually we were given access to 2 of the council's environmental scientists under the watchful eye of a public relations officer.
She's got a bit of a care and responsibility role for the staff to make sure that we don't get taken advantage of, I guess, by the media.
They were taking us to a nearby farm for a staged demonstration of their work. Along the way, one of them, Dr. Andy Hicks, admitted some uncertainty about whether the proposed dam's flushing system, supposedly crucial for keeping nutrient discharge under control, would actually work.
So I think there's still more work to be done to know whether flushing flows from the dam will help. And it's the kind of thing you really need to try and monitor and see how well it works before you know whether it's going to work in the way that you predicted.
Sort of way you'd have to build the dam before you can find out.
Yeah, because each river system is so particular. So to get a good flushing flow, the best way to know it is to give it a try and see how well it works and then just adapt as you go along.
If that seemed worryingly hit and miss, at the farm we wanted to find out what the council does now to control pollution-causing nutrients. Excess nitrogen and phosphorus in the water cause algal blooms, which slowly suffocate rivers, killing off what lives in them. When the Rotunifer project was first mooted, the council's scientists put forward a highly controversial new theory, that pollution could be managed by controlling only one of those nutrients, phosphorus. But independent scientists argue that nitrogen must also be managed. Failing to do so would leave farmers free to pollute at will.
You really have to manage both phosphorus and nitrogen. Managing nitrate can only be done by reducing agricultural intensity, and in fact they wanted to increase agricultural intensity in many of the catchments of that waterway.
Indeed, Professor Death gave evidence in 2015 to an Environmental Protection Authority hearing which was set up to investigate the potential environmental impacts of the dam.
All I really did when I presented my evidence to the EPA is to point out that the science, both from New Zealand and from all around the world, that just managing for phosphorus is not going to achieve the outcome that you want. There's hundreds and hundreds of papers which have been published to show exactly that same thing.
The EPA concluded that managing only for phosphorus was fraught with risk. In response, the Council modified its environmental regulations to include nitrogen as a nutrient worth managing, by asking farmers to monitor their own nitrogen discharges. Back on the farm, Dr. Hicks wanted to show us the work he and the council team do.
I don't actually go in the field very much. I sort of sit at a desk and write reports. But our team will be out taking samples from rivers 4 days a week.
From his perspective, Water pollution is a complex issue with many causes. And, he claims, nitrate levels in the Tukituki River are not that bad.
But in terms of nutrient levels, they're not really that high. So I wouldn't say the Tukituki is so much worse than other systems. Nitrogen levels are pretty low. Phosphorus levels could certainly come down, and that's the thing we're most worried about.
But Professor Death is adamant that's not the case.
Every freshwater ecologist, including some of the ones which are advising the Hawke's Bay Regional Council, know full well that ecosystem health is driven by two nutrients, and for 98% of New Zealand, the thing that's polluting our waterways is too much nitrate, and the only way that we know of at the moment to reduce nitrate is to reduce the number of cows that we have on the area of land that we have.
The next day we went back to see Councillor Dick, one of the dam's leading advocates. In light of what we'd learned, we wanted to know why he was still so confident pollution could be kept under control.
Your own scientists said to us yesterday, you can only really know flushing flows work once the dam has been built.
The Board of Inquiry spent considerable time on this and heard from a number of experts and came to the conclusion that it works.
We have your own scientists telling us that you can only know if it works once you actually construct the dam and then try and figure it out.
Well, if that has to be, that has to be.
Recognising that nitrogen management is critical, the EPA has now set limits on how much of it can be discharged by farms. But it's still unclear how that limit can be legally enforced.
The nitrogen limits that have been set, which is at 0.8 milligrams per litre, that's a communal limit.
Yeah.
And how is that going to be enforced over the entire region?
With difficulty. It's not a legally enforceable limit. No, you're quite right. And in fact, 0.8 is almost pristine.
But it was the Environmental Protection Agency itself that set that limit. So how can you argue that that limit is not relevant?
Well, they did that in their wisdom, but other people have other views. In that respect, they got it slightly wrong.
Then doesn't this make a mockery of the proclamations about how valuable this environmental policing is going to be if it can't actually be enforced?
Well, it will be an influence in determining the makeup and the review of farm environmental management plans. I mean, you've got to start from somewhere and see how it goes.
But ultimately it comes down to you guys policing it yourselves.
Oh, we make the policy, yeah.
But it's not just the environmental aspects of the dam that have raised concern. Peter Fraser, a former New Zealand Treasury economist, independently assessed the Ruataniwha scheme. He found that the scheme's projected water pricing at between 40 to 50 cents per cubic metre was way too expensive for farmers.
That's very, very expensive water. The fact that you've got water that no farmer in New Zealand can afford to buy should have sent alarm bells ringing. It didn't.
The proposed water price was then almost halved.
Major investors, because of that fall in the water price, they no longer got the rate of return which they actually needed. So surprise, surprise, they pulled out of the project. So that was more than enough information for them to cancel the project. They then went on to spend another $10 to $15 million on a completely doomed project.
On October the 8th, 2016, the final day of the Hawke's Bay election, anti-dam campaigner Paul Bailey was waiting anxiously for news.
I don't think I've been this nervous since my wedding day. It's bloody strange. Hello, Paul here.
Hi Paul, it's Paula ringing from the Hawke's Bay Regional Council. How are you?
Oh, look, not too bad for a Saturday afternoon.
So at the moment you're in, say, third place with 7,776 votes.
Wow.
Okay?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
No.
Okay.
All right, no problem, and we'll talk to you tomorrow, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Paul.
Rightio.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Holy crapoli, I got on. Wow. I'm at number 3. Over 7,500 people voted for me.
But an anti-dam majority on the council wasn't guaranteed just yet.
In terms of the dam and the environment, it's still going to depend on whether the three guys get in Hastings. I haven't heard that yet, but certainly if they all get back on, then yeah, that potentially it means the end of the dam.
Paul nervously awaited the final outcome.
Shit! Yes, the three guys got in.
All of them?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Excellent. That means we've got the majority around the table, and time for change.
Paul gets a call from a senior Green Party MP.
You've done it. That is so amazing for rural Haniwha.
Yep.
So this is a game changer,
Yep.
I reckon. You have done something for the whole country as well as for yourself.
No.
I'm so proud of you, Paul. You've worked so hard for this.
A month after the election, Hawke's Bay's newly constituted council met for the first time. The main issue on the table was whether the council would place a moratorium on the dam, which anti-dam councillors referred to as breaking for a cup of tea. The atmosphere was tense. A pro-dam councillor was one of the first to voice her concerns.
How can we speed it up? Because you're asking for a cup of tea, but a cup of tea is 10 minutes, it's not 5 months. I don't see a need to send unrest to the community.
There are people in our community who think that this scheme is an absolute lemon. There are people in this community who think this scheme is the best thing since sliced bread. And that's why I'm really pleased to see that we're going to go through this review process and actually find out.
But matters were becoming even more complicated. The council was now at odds with its own investment company, which had already spent $20 million on the project. Further muddying the waters was a court case over conservation land in the dam's flood zone. Controversially, the New Zealand government's Department of Conservation was fighting on behalf of the investment company to allow this land to be destroyed so the project could go ahead. Finally, it was put to the vote.
We do need a cup of tea. Our community's insisting on a cup of tea. Gives us time to review all the issues. All those in favour of the resolution?
Aye.
Against? It is carried. Thank you, Chairman. I said at the beginning.
While the future of this divisive dam still hung in the balance, as many as 10 other irrigation projects were waiting in the wings, several burdened by very similar issues to Ruataniwha. And with faith in government's will to address water problems all but run dry, civil society organisations had formed an unprecedented alliance. In June 2017, scientists, public health advocates, environmentalists and tourism exporters announced their own freshwater rescue plan.
We need to move away from turning our land into something that it isn't by damming our rivers and funneling that water onto crops that the land cannot support.
The plan called for an immediate halt to irrigation funding.
We cannot afford to be using taxpayer money to subsidise further pollution. Yet there is nearly $500 million taxpayer dollars allocated to subsidising irrigation schemes like the Ruataniwha Dam.
Instead, campaigners wanted this irrigation fund to be used to transition to sustainable farming. They also highlighted the growing human health risks, increasing the likelihood of future water contamination events such as Havelock North's.
Campylobacter, cryptosporidiosis, and VTEC or STEC. And that's a disease that not everyone has heard about. It used to be very uncommon. It's probably hard to see this graph, but over the last 20 years, this has gone from being just a handful of cases to now being a relatively common infectious disease. But a lot of it appears to be related to intensification of agriculture.
So that brings us to our final step, to adopt OECD recommendations to establish a whole-of-government, multi-stakeholder process to develop a long-term vision for the transition of New Zealand to a low-carbon, greener environment.
You can't steal our boats and get away with it!
In the second part of this investigation, we'll examine allegations of high-level political interference in water affairs and follow the controversial land swap case to its conclusion.